All right, how's everybody doing? We're going to try to get through this fairly quickly tonight because if I start coughing, you'll just have to forgive me. It came back, the same stuff I had like 2 months ago. I do. I got one sitting in my pocket right now ready for when it starts. So, yeah. But it's okay. I call this my sexy voice so I can sound like a man and, talk really low. Not as low as Freddie, but, I'm working on it. So, all right. We got a couple things we definitely need to pray for. Devon had surgery Monday. It was sinus, septum, all that stuff in there. So he's recuperating at home. Who else has had stuff? I don't know. What about Sarah? Oh, I didn't know Sarah's having surgery tomorrow. Okay, Sarah's having surgery tomorrow. Do we need to remember her in our prayers? Keep remembering Dawn's nephew, Ben, in your prayers. He's still having a hard time with everything he had to do. Listening to Devon talk, they basically took his skull off and trying to reshape stuff, and he's got his jawline in particular, yeah. So, about who? No. I don't know. I have not seen that. So, the little girl I've asked you to pray for, by the way, I finally figured out she is 8 years old. They did come back, it is cancer, but it was confined to the ovary, so they think she's fine. It was a little girl from Montgomery that I know. Yeah, Allie's her name, and she had a tumor about the size of a grapefruit on her ovary, and so they took her ovary out. But it was a tumor, stage 1 tumor or whatever. But she's back to normal, doing everything right now. So doctors seem good that they have it all because it was contained right there. Couple announcements real quick before we get for prayer requests too. Don't forget Sunday night is the Resaca thing out at the farm. So you'll hear more about that Sunday, and we'll have to get food and stuff like that. But it's out there at the battlefield at 5 o'clock. So make sure everybody remembers that. Who else do we need to remember and pray for? Oh. Okay. Those who didn't hear, her hairdresser has an aneurysm in her aorta. And so, yikes. Anything else that we need to remember? Oh, he does have surgery coming up. That's right. Yeah, Kevin does have surgery. I gotcha. Yeah. So definitely need to remember Kevin in our prayers. Got a lot of people surgery right now. So well, let's pray here, and then we'll jump into our new class here. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this day, for this week, for our time together. We thank you for our fellowship that we were able to have with each other and to catch up on each other's lives for the week. And Father, we are grateful for this time of prayer that we can come and make our requests known to you. And Father, there are so many here and loved ones that are having surgery or have had surgery. And Father, we just pray that you will be with them as they're going through all of this and the nervousness that some of them are feeling. We pray that you will put your peace and comfort around them, and please be with the doctors and all the nurses that will be watching over them and taking care of them. Father, we are so grateful that you are a God that listens to us and that we can make our requests known, and we thank you for your Son, the sacrifices he gave us, and it's in Jesus' name, amen. All right, we are starting Genesis tonight. So we are in Genesis chapter 1. Yay. So I'm actually real excited about this. I've never actually taught Genesis from this type of perspective before. So I'm excited about it. We're not going to do like especially in certain sections, we're not going to go verse by verse like I did in John and stuff like this, because if we do this, we will be in Genesis. I mean, Genesis 52 chapters, so we've been here at least a year trying to get through this. And so we're going to look at concepts and take things in sections. But just kind of a little brief understanding about Genesis. Genesis is generally attributed to be written by Moses. Now, technically, we do not know who wrote Genesis, but traditionally, it is given to Moses as, being the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy. We call that the Pentateuch, books of Moses, because everything is attributed to him being written. So that means that Genesis would have been written about 2,500 to maybe 3,000 if you're young, and I'll talk about this later, about 2,500 to 3,000 years after the events of chapters 1 and 2 in there. So you're talking about a massive amount of time that has taken place. Genesis means in the beginning. That's why the book starts with those first words, in the beginning. That's what it's about. Genesis can be divided up into 3 main parts. You kind of got your introduction, which is chapters 1 and 2. And then you kind of got God dealing with all of mankind of chapter 3 through 11. And that's when we'll get past Noah, we'll get past the Tower of Babel. And then what happens in chapter 12, it begins to really take on the premise of the rest of the Old Testament, that you're focusing on one family and one person. Not that there isn't anything else going on in the world, but that Genesis is really focusing in on Abraham and that family. And that's what happens in chapter 12 till you get to the Gospels. And that's kind of where everything else falls through that mindset. And ultimately, it is that one family that the Messiah is ultimately going to come through. Now, this is something that is interesting. I think Genesis, especially the first couple of chapters, are written for a purpose. So if Moses is writing this, if he has written this, where has Moses spent the majority of his young life? He spent the first 40 years in a certain place, if you know the story of Moses. We'll get to it one day in Exodus. Remember, this is when he's in Egypt, right? Because remember, this is when the Pharaoh has all of and we'll end with Joseph, and when all of Abraham's descendants get to Egypt, and when we get to Exodus, they're now slaves, and the Pharaoh wants to kill all the firstborn of the Hebrew people because they're growing so big, and Moses' mom says, no, I'm going to hide them. He puts them in the basket. He lives under Pharaoh's rule for 40 years. That means he is also introduced to what type of religion? All different gods. Now, I think, and you will see this as we talk about Genesis 1 here tonight, that part of Moses writing the book of Genesis, at least these first couple of chapters, is to go against the other traditions that are out there. So, what do I mean by that? The Old Testament, for a Jewish Christian or Christian Jewish faith, what we stick by, is not the only people or faith that has a creation story. Okay? Mesopotamia, which is where creation takes place. I'll talk about that a little bit in here. They have it. Babylonians have it. Sumerians have it. Egyptians have it. For instance, when we get to day 4, what does he create on day 4? He creates the sun and moon and stars galore, if you remember the book, if you know the song, right? Well, guess what? If Moses is in Egypt, or he has been trained in Egypt, there is a god of the sun, which is Ra. That's where you get that also, we have it on the back of our money, so there you go. But you have this sun god that is here. The Greeks have it. Also, when we study Genesis is not the only place that you find a flood story where the world was destroyed by water. Sometimes it's a local story. which is the Sumerian text, is a local flood that destroys all of the world. I believe Mesopotamian has a global disaster. So you have all of these other stories that are happening, and I think, and this is kind of why I think kind of what Moses is doing when he's writing this, he is giving the history from, well, you got all these people, and they're hearing all these different stories. Let's put it into a right context of what took place. For instance, when we get to chapter 6, you're going to come across this idea of the sons of God mating with the daughter of men. We'll wait and we'll talk about what that means later. But then you have this race of giants called the Nephilim that come out of all of this. Of course, this is before the flood. Well, what kind of stories could that sound like? Well, automatically I think of Greek mythology, where the gods come down to earth and sleep with the human women, and all of a sudden you have these superhuman beings like what we call Hercules and some of those characters that come out of it. So you have these traditions that are in this world, and I personally think that part of why Moses is writing this, number one, is for the history of creation, getting on down to talking about one family. But it's also to say, let's put some things in the right order here. So because when you look at chapters 3 through 11, until we get to the Tower of Babel, man is one language, man is one people, and all of these stories are shared throughout everybody, right? So the world is not 7 billion people at that time. So you have all of these stories that are taking place. So I think it's very interesting. In fact, getting out of that Middle East area, if you come down to South America, and we'll talk about this when we get to the flood, to the Aztecs and some of those people in South America, they have some of the exact same stories too. So I guess what I'm saying is creation, the flood, whatever the Nephilim and these angels or sons of God and daughters of men coming, whatever those are, there are other things that have these stories as well. So I think that's part of why Moses is writing this. So let's kind of dive in here and look. And when you get to chapter 1, and we'll spend some time here in chapter 1 and 2 and 3. I'm not sure how far we'll get tonight. We should get through chapter 1 and maybe the 7th day where God rests. If you look at this from the beginning, we have 6 days of creation. And then there is a 7th day, and that's in the beginning of chapter 2, where God will rest. Day 1 and day 4 match up. Day 2 and day 5 match up. Day 3 and day 6 match up. So you will kind of see this thing begin to take place. What you will begin to see is chaos, and then out of this gigantic, chaotic creation, God becomes and gets specific. And it kind of formulates it on down. And you'll see some of that in some of the words. So let's begin in chapter 1 here from the very beginning and start with the stories that we know. These are stories that we have heard probably most of our lives. So we're going to try to keep them all together. But there's some interesting things that take place. So, of course, it starts from the very beginning that we know. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and I can't see. And darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So you have this scene, this creation scene of primordial chaos, if I can put it in that phrase. Whatever this is, Moses is trying to put it in his story that when God is beginning to create all of this, it is chaotic. What is also interesting there, I want to say a couple of things that you find in chapters 1 and chapter 2 that you don't find throughout. I am not a Hebrew scholar close to it at all. Greek, I can fight my way through. Hebrew is even worse. The word for God here in chapters 1 and chapter 2 is the word Elohim in Hebrew. It is a plurality word. Now, we don't need to read more into it, but it was a word that would have been used around that world, that Egyptian, Mesopotamian world that Moses would have come through, of meaning many gods, like a God picture. And so it's interesting that is the word that he's using here in the beginning. God, Elohim, meaning plural, created the heavens and the earth. And what's interesting here in verses 1 through 3, you find all three people of the Godhead present in the very beginning. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Verse 1, you got God, and we automatically attribute that to the Father, created the heavens in darkness. And what happens? The Spirit of God, so now you have the Spirit present over there, was hovering over the face of the waters. Verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Well, you may sit here and say, well, what do you mean? Well, go back to what we just studied in John chapter 1. Remember, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were created by him and through him. So if Jesus is the Word, you have the three persons of the Godhead right there in creation. You got the Father, who's kind of the head in charge. You got the Spirit, and you got the Son, which will come later as Jesus, as the Word. And he is there, and I don't understand how that works, but he is present with his word speaking, let there be light, and there was light. Now, I'm not going to try to get into an apologetic thing in here whatsoever, but even creationists and scientists, as they try to go back, and this is where the Big Bang Theory comes from, is that even your most atheistic scientist comes back and says that life happened in a blink, that it was an instant. Now, they call that the Big Bang. We, from a Christian perspective and a believing perspective, we call that God. And that, yes, it was instantaneously, and boom, all of this thing happened. Now, as you'll notice, when we get to day 4, there isn't the sun, moon, and stars galore yet that are around. It's just there is this light. Now there is light that is present to counteract the darkness, because if you remember back there in verse 2, darkness is over the face of the deep. Verse 4, and God saw the light, and that the light was good. What do you think he means by good here? Okay, yeah, absolutely. He could see. 100% people could see. A lot of times when we look at good, we think of good as morally good, like good versus evil. This is not that word. This is a word in Hebrew and in the Greek version that literally means it was perfect. Now, you will see later he will add something else around in the sixth day and seventh day it will be very good. He'll add very in that. So in his mind and his thought, as he's looking at this is perfect. Now, doesn't mean it's not shaped up yet, but that it's perfect in there. Now, back there in verse 4. And God separated the light from the darkness, called the light day, the darkness night, and there was evening and morning the first day. I'll give you my opinion, I take a literal 24-hour day creation view. It says morning and evening are the first day, that is a 24-hour thing, because for a Jew, the next day would begin at the end at 6 p.m. that night they go through, they have the day, and then when that next day comes, that's the end of their day, beginning of their next day. I view that as a 24-hour day. I think that's why Moses is putting it in. There is another view, and there are other views with this. I will be fair as I teach this class. It is more of an allegorical view that this is not a 24-hour day, that it's an allegory of saying it was a time period in which it took place. And Moses is just writing from an allegorical standpoint and saying it was 24 hours. That is where you may hear theistic evolution. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase, meaning, yes, there's a God, but God worked through nature, and that was millions. This first day took over billions and billions of years to take place. I don't take that view. I take a 24-hour view. I'll just go ahead and tell you that. I am what you would call a young creationist, meaning Earth probably 6,000 to 7,000 years old. That's probably shot over everybody's head, but there you go. We got it in here. So understand that's how I'm teaching this. There are a lot of good people on the other side of the argument that they make some very compelling cases for it. However, when we get to the flood and we talk about the flood and the reactions because of the flood, it changes things. Our earth changes, carbon dating changes, all of this other stuff. So I just want to kind of throw that out. Go ahead, Ken. Mm-hmm. I was telling, when we get to chapter 6, I was telling a story of where I think why Moses is writing from some of this. Yes. Yes. I guess what I'm saying is, though, there were other stories like this. It's this creation, these people in chapter 6, the flood, that is not alone to Christianity and to the Bible. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. Yes, I agree. I agree 1,000% with you. Yes. Correct. Correct. There are some people who view Genesis, in particular Genesis. In fact, Harding is having a blow up right now because of this very thing. Because one of the Bible teachers is teaching Genesis from a book by a guy named John Walton. And he takes that Genesis is allegorical, that it's not literal, and that it is all allegorical, that Adam and Eve were not literal people, but it was just representative of people as a whole. Correct. That's what they would say. Yeah, that's what they would say. Yeah, yeah. Yes. Yep. Right. And so when you get to day 4 and he starts adding the different lights, the sun, the moon, the stars, he mentions in here it's specifically so that man can count days, can count months, can count years, can count seasons by all of this stuff. So I do think what he is, because if you look at this from verse 1, this is chaos. It is chaotic. And what he is taking from chaos, he's about to create order. And it's going to take 6 days, and on the 7th, he's going to rest for it to create order that is a specific thing. That not only do we have light, now we have light specifically from a ball of gas that we call the sun. And then we have a little bit of a light that we got from the moon. And so I think that's a good way of looking at what he's saying. Because you got to remember, if you got to think about something, Genesis is probably not the first book that is written. I would say it's probably Job. I think Job is the first book that's probably written. And I think Job is a contemporary probably of Abraham in that time. Nothing's ever been written from I got to be careful how I say this, from a Jewish perspective. Not that Jews were around yet. They weren't called Jews yet. They're the Hebrew people from Abraham's family. Nothing's written about this. And here's the thing about the Hebrew people, huge on genealogy. Go back to Matthew chapter 1. You got the whole genealogy of Jesus sitting in there, all right? They're huge on genealogy. But up until this time, think about this. Who are these people? Well, you have Abraham, and he's going to have a son, and we're going to call him Isaac, and Isaac's going to have a son, and he's going to call him Jacob, and Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob's going to have 12 sons, and then they're eventually going to spread out and marry, and then that's eventually where the Hebrew people come from. So remember, there is nothing written down talking about their history. And so Moses is giving them this history. Probably Genesis is written, to me, Genesis may be written even after what you find in Exodus chapter 3, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai getting the 10 Commandments. Or what, chapter 20. Sorry, I guess we need to get back in chapter 20. 3 is when he's called by God. Chapter 20, 21, 22. It could be written after that, because it's not until we get to chapter 21, 22, chapters 20, 21, 22, that God's law is written down. God at this point is speaking to people individually. He's going to talk to Adam individually. He's going to talk to Noah individually. He's going to talk to probably Methuselah individually. He's going to talk to Abraham individually. And then eventually we get down to Moses, and he's still talking through Moses, but now we'll have laws that are written down. So in this period, as Moses is writing this, they don't have any history of where they come from. They don't know anything. And as I said, if this book is written around 1,500 years before Christ, we're back 2,500-ish plus years from Moses writing this. So I do think that what he's giving is not a great in-depth detail, but he's showing out of chaos how God created, excuse me, order. Everybody, does that make sense to what I'm saying? It's back. All right, so let's get on through to day 2 now. Now, day 2, pay attention to something, because what happens in day 2 possibly could have an effect when we get to Genesis chapter 6. So we'll talk about that later. Day 2, God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so that God called the expanse heaven. Some of you may have another translation and called firmament. Yes, this is where you get the firmament. God is separating firmaments from firmaments in all of this. And of course, and then there's the evening and the morning was the second day. So there's our next day. So what you have is, in this chaotic scene, whatever this blob is, this heavens and the earth thing, this cosmos, he is taking water, which would be on the earth, this ball of water, separating it from other water, which we would call probably the atmosphere. And then in between, there's an expanse that we call the firmament, and he called it heaven. That is a clue to something that may take place. Yes? Yes. Yep. Where the clouds would be. Yes, where the clouds would be. I don't really want to give you my talk away from Genesis chapter 6, so I'm not going to dive into it. Just keep that in mind when we get further on down, when we get to the flood. So basically, you got 3 levels here. Ball of earth, that seems to be at this point is nothing but a glob of water. There is something, firmament, expanse, whatever this is. And then there's another piece up top that we call the atmosphere. And so, for instance, in our atmosphere right now, there is always 70,000 tons of water in the atmosphere at all times. Not in all in one place, but at one time around this big giant ball that we call the earth. There's at least 70,000 tons of water up there at all times. So, make sense with everybody? No, Roxy's like, I don't know what he's talking about here. It's a lot of water, yes. Remember, it is going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. We'll get to that one later. All right. Verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heavens, he gathered together into one place, and let dry land appear, and it was so. God called the dry land earth, and on the waters that were gathered together, he called the sea, and God saw that it was, here we go, good. Again, so now you see there is something that is beginning to take shape here. I don't know what the chaos was and from day one, but from day 1 to day 3, now we at least have a ball, this globe. We have a separation that there is land coming up out of this ball now that we call earth, and it's called separating out the waters he called the sea or oceans, whatever you want to call it in there. So now you see that this chaotic mess is beginning to take shape. Verse 11, God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. So what's he doing? We're creating vegetation. We're creating out of vegetation also what are we preparing for? Food. We're preparing for people. We're preparing for animals to come. So you see this preparation of God using all of this. And this is where I will say that the allegorical people will take it and say, see, it doesn't just happen in one day. Well, God can make anything happen in a 24-hour period. God can make it happen like that, you know. But this is where the allegorical people will sit here and say, see, this is not just a 24-hour day. It takes time for plants to grow and seeds to grow and all this other stuff. So, but as I said, I take a young view. And it was so, verse 12. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, which is their seed, each according to its own kind. And God saw it was good. So we're back to this perfect thinking. And the evening, and then there was morning the third day. So you'll see this. I don't know if you begin to pick up on this. There's a phrase that is used in each of these sections, and we will see it start being used in day 5 and day 6, after its own kind. You know, I understand that we try to genetically modify things nowadays, and we can do a lot of crazy stuff with genetic modification. It's not genetic modification. Corn is going to produce corn. And that's what it's going to do. And pine trees are going to produce pine trees, and they're going to pollinate each other and keep on going to continue that growth process and everything. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. You want to know why I think it is? I think because for some people, it's too easy. It's too simple. It can't be that simple. It can't be that simple that it was 24-hour days. And sometimes in their minds, it doesn't make sense. For instance, Mr. Farmer over there, you know, when you plant whatever you plant in the spring, how long does it take it to finally grow up to harvest? I mean, I guess everything's different, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take weeks and months, And if you don't have rain, then it's even longer after that, and it goes slow. And so people struggle with sitting here saying, well, how can seeds all of a sudden appear, and all of a sudden now we have trees and we have vegetation and we have plants growing and all this? And I think for some people, it's too simple. Yep. Yep. That is why I have always said it takes more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a believer in creation. Yes, they do. Yes. We do. We do. Sure. 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 Mm-hmm. Sure. It takes millions of years to go. Yeah. Right. And I think that's where they sit. I mean, what you said, Judy, a second ago is it takes a lot of faith, because to take the Big Bang Theory, we take from that out of nothing, all of a sudden there are two hydrogen atoms that ram each other at the speed of light, and bam, all of this appeared. Order never comes from chaos unless there's a creator that pushes it. Yes. At the right spot, in the right way. Yep. Yep. Right. Yep. In the right orbit, in the right way to be able to shift, and somehow, and even us, even life on Earth, if you take an evolutionary thing, that there's a single cell organism that in this murky gook, as the Earth was still trying to form, begins to split, and the cells begin to split, and there forms different sea creatures, and then all of a sudden there's a sea creature that walks out on land, and then that's what forms all the animals that we have on land, and then all of a sudden it forms monkeys or whatever, and then that's all of a sudden one stands up, and all of a sudden now we can walk, and you got Neanderthals, and it kind of gets on down through all that. It takes a lot of faith to sit here and say that all of that came from some gaseous burp 13.5 billion years ago. Mm-hmm. Well, they would say that the universe continues to be expanding. Yeah. Well, they do think that one day it will run out. Mm-hmm. Yep. There's a black hole that at the beginning, and I guess this is true, that in the center of our universe, of the Milky Way, it circles around a black hole. And that actually our closest neighbors, the Andromeda galaxy, that has a black hole that centers, and that we are colliding toward each other, and that in about 10 billion light years will eventually collide, and who knows what happens. I won't be here to tell you that, so I don't know. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. The world with God is as 1,000 days, and 1,000 days is as one day. Yeah. And the reality is, we don't know. I lean where Ken leans of, if God is by his Spirit directing Moses to write that it is a morning and evening, which you and I would understand as a 24-hour period, I lean where Ken leans to say, that's a 24-hour day. And think about this. God on day 6 is going to take a piece of mud and melt it together, and then that's going to become a man. That's like God's creator, and I'm not. in all of this. And that's why it is. And this is a big faith thing. It is a faith thing because of what Judy, and I think Judy's bringing up some very good points because this is where people do struggle with this. I know Darwin gets blasted a lot for his theory of evolution, of the origin of species and everything like this. Darwin wasn't this highbrow atheist that was sitting here trying to prove God wrong or anything else like this at all. And most of these scientists were believers and stuff like this. It is trying to figure out how all of this is working. And yeah, guess what? It's really simple to sit here and say, yep, day one, God created light when there was none. Day two, God made, I can't even remember everything. Clouds and sky so blue. There you go. Marisha knows the song in there. It takes a lot of faith to believe it. But it takes even more faith, in my opinion, to say all of this order came from nothing. And plus, if we're honest right now, not to get into a big, deep scientific talk right now, the universal creation theory from the Big Bang perspective is under a lot of scrutiny right now, thanks to the James Webb telescope that we sent up a couple of years ago. Because it can apparently appear by looking at infrared, and they've already found universes that are further away than they should be, if the theory of evolution and the Big Bang is correct, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not getting to a big science thing. Yes. Yep. Darwin, and I know, like I said, Darwin gets blasted a lot because he's the big one that pushed evolution. And I kind of look at what Darwin was saying from his evolutionary standpoint is almost survival of the fittest. It is, and that kind of goes with what Ken was saying, is there is a sense in which evolution does take place. There is a survival of the fittest thing that does happen in life. You don't believe me? Wait, if there's ever a nuclear apocalypse, the strongest will survive. That's kind of what will happen. Look at us. If all of us came from one man and one woman, all of us look different. We all have different skin tones. We all have different looks. We all have different hair. Well, guess what's happened over the years? There's some sort of, and I want to put it in this way, microevolution that takes place. Yes, that's correct. Evolution doesn't have to be a bad word. Yes. Yep. There you go. I don't know. I'll ask him when I get there one day. But of course, I'd love to go. I'd go to Mars tomorrow on Elon's rocket if they let me. But that is what it is. I think it takes, in my opinion, it happens with the flood, and I will explain that. I think what you have taking place in that basically half a year period, the earth changes in that time, in my opinion. And I'll explain that when we get there. But I think that's what happens. Yes. In my opinion, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing. Science and faith do not have to be enemies. Yes, they don't have to be enemies. Mankind has made them enemies by sitting here saying it. I don't believe, now this is me, you can disagree, it's okay. I don't believe you can prove God 100%. Because at some point, there's some faith that has to take you over to that, to believe that there is a God that I cannot see that is there. Now, I look at his creation, I look around the world, I look at my human body, just my body alone, how it works, that says there has to be a creator. Think about this. Everything shouts that there is a creator. God is the master artist, if I can put it in that way. If you look into a telescope in the night sky, you see things that are just blow your mind away. You look here on earth, the beautiful pictures when the sky turns a different shade of colors as the sun's going down. Or as I said, even looking at the human body, it is a perfect creation. And it's called the teleological argument for creation, that if there's a creation, it shouts that there's a creator. Like my watch, it's an Apple Watch. For me to believe what some people believe in creation, Judy, do I have enough faith to take this watch, take it all apart, completely apart, put it in a bag and shake it for 13.5 billion years? What is the chances that I'm going to pull out a watch that's back together and on time? Nothing. But that's what we're getting to, where, it is like the impossibility is like 1 to the 10th times whatever power, the chance of that happening. So let's go search for God then. Because if there's a creator, which makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't mean I know where he came from, but if there is a creator, let me go searching for him. Yes, I do. Yeah. No, because I have no earthly idea where he came from. He's just always been. It is very deep, and that is. And if you want, see, that's why I still think that that's where faith comes in. If you want, yes, I would love to know that answer. But if that is what I've got to have, then do I have faith? If that makes sense. Faith has to take me over that gap that's there. That one, I could have 99.9%. That 0.1%, I got to have that last little step over. That's faith. Oh, sure it do. Surely do. We'll talk about some things when we get into the garden with the devil and all of that, what happened in heaven, how did that take place? I've got some interesting thoughts on that when we get to it. He seems to be in the garden with them every day. And if what Ezekiel said is correct, he was put there by God to be their protector. Now there you go. How about have that one in there for you and try to figure out why does Adam and Eve need a protector in the garden? We'll talk about that when we get to chapter 3. All right, let's go here a little bit further. Where are we at? 14? Good, because I can't see anything. Oh, all right, 14. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night, and he let there be signs for the seasons and for days and for years, and let the lights in the expanse of the heavens give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the two greater lights. The greater light he made to rule the day, the lesser night to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens. There's your cosmos in there. But we see them in the sky, right? Think about that for a second. He set them in the expanse. So from a human perspective, where do we see the sun? In the sky. Is it really in our sky? No. It's a billion miles away, sitting at the center of the solar system. The moon. Is the moon in our sky? No. It's sitting a few 100,000 kilometers away from us here. But it looks like they're in the sky. So that's kind of what the picture he's painting there. God set them there and to give light on the earth and to rule the day over the night and to separate the light from the darkness, and God saw that it was good, and the evening, and there was morning the fourth day. So now we have this matching up. Day 1, God said there be light. Day 4, let me put the light into a specific place. We call it the sun. Cities were named after this. Biblical cities actually were named after this. Back in this time and in this area. Everybody heard the word Beth Shemesh? Beth Shemesh, something like that, however said. That's called the city of the sun. Now, the city of the moon, you probably all heard of. You and I know it as Jericho. And they kept those names throughout all of it. So think when Moses is writing this, they are writing this, and think about where the children of the Hebrew children have just come out of. Egyptian bondage, Egyptian slavery. So what are they introduced to? Do they know about God? Well, yes, they know about God because that's part of the argument back. But if they have been in Egypt, they've also been introduced to all the Egyptian gods. That said, there is a God of the sun. There is a God of the moon. We call the sun God Ra. If you're Greek, you call it Apollo. Or we call it, if you're Roman, Sunday. See, that's where we get that from. We call Sunday, first day of the week, Sunday, from the Roman God for the sun. So there you go, pagans. And so he's writing this, and these people are going to be in Canaan, and they're naming, and the Canaanites have named them Jericho and Beth-Shemesh because they have these Mesopotamian gods and this faith that said these god Marduk and his son got into a fight, and here you have these different blobs that are up there now. So that's why I think Moses, part of what Moses is doing is writing this. So that's day 4. So let's see if we can get to there. Verse 20. God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let there be birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kind. There you got that again. And every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So here now you have the creation of life with animals that are in the sky to match up with day 5 or day 2. So you got birds that fly in the sky, and you have sea creatures. And he says great sea creatures, which is interesting there. That actually is, I'm just going to tell you what it is in Hebrew, literally means like dragon. You would see this in Job when God is questioning Job about where the home of the Leviathan is. So there are great sea creatures, right? We got whales, we got the same word is used, I believe it's in Isaiah for crocodiles, meaning and stuff like that. So we do have sea creatures, we have different things that are there. And so he is making this. Now I want to bring something out here that he does here. Verse 22, he introduces a new phrase, and he's about to say this on the next 3 days. God blessed them. Okay, so everything that he's made in creation so far, plants, earth, stars, moon, sky, he has not blessed. Now we have living creatures, and God says God blesses them. You know, he's going to say it a second later, be fruitful and multiply, talking about human beings in there. Same mindset in there. So God is blessing this creation. So now you see a different picture of God beginning to take shape. And it's going to build to its ultimate creation, man. So not about the earth, not about the plants, sky, but now when you talk about these creatures, you start seeing God's, I guess I can say it, God's love beginning to come out in all of this. So God blessed them. them be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the sea, and the birds, let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, and there's the fifth day. So that blessing for reproduction purposes. Okay? All that one. Let's go further here. Now let's get in verse 24. God said, let's bring forth living creatures according to their own kind. You see that phrase again? According to their own kind. You know, you do not see in nature. Now, you may see in nature animals have a care for another animal that may not be like them. You see that. For instance, a dog may have a care for a cat, but you do not see a dog and a cat mating. You see this phrase over and over, according to its own kind. So, where am I at? To their kind, he wants to bring livestock. So we want to create animals that are on the earth, they're cattle. Some of these may be even domestics. It may be probably where dogs and all this stuff comes in. Creeping things, so probably like your insects, snakes, bugs, all that type of stuff. Beasts of the earth, according to their kinds. So you got domesticated animals, you got insects that scare the mess out of you, and then you got wild beasts that are out there, you know, that have taken place. And that's kind of what we have that happened in this. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. So here we are. Now, let's go a step further. Verse 26. God said, now remember, we've been using God in the plural sense in this whole chapter, Elohim. Now he's about to show that he's plural, because he says this, let us make man in our image. Who's the us? Well, from our perspective, there's your Son, that's your Holy Spirit, and that's your Father. Let us make man in our image. So does that mean he created us and we look exactly like God? Okay. So he didn't create us exactly looking like him because God is spirit, we're flesh and blood. But are we created in God's image? We have a spiritualness about us. We have a sense of morality that animals do not have, right? There's one other piece in there. We have emotions. We have what? We have creativity. We have these things. And if you'll notice, this is what separates us out from the beast. And ultimately, there's one thing that separates us out from the beast. We have a living, breathing soul within all of us that will one day go back to God. But we are made in the nature of his likeness. We are like him. He is kind. He has emotions. He is creative. He is has a sense of morality. He is spiritual. So are we. And so when he says, let us make man in our image, that's what he is doing. And so, and notice what he says here, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. This does not mean when you say dominion that you're supposed to abuse God's creation. He's not sitting here saying, well, I'm going to abuse this animal, even though I will step on a spider in a heartbeat. He's not sitting here talking about that. Don't abuse the land. Don't abuse all of these things. So I do think we need to be careful of all of this. But he's creating an order. It's verse 27. So God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Chapter 2 will go deeper into this creation, okay? So don't read too much into it. But notice what he said in verse 28. God bless them. That's the second time we have this. God said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, have dominion over the fish and sea. All that takes place. Verse 29, God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree and the seed of its fruit, you shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. So he is giving man in charge of everything, including creating the ground, creating food, tilling it, taking care of it, and doing all of these things. Yes, absolutely. He's basically making him a manager there. And it didn't say that everything, he had to still work, which is going to come up later after the fall. And it was so, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, now it's not just good, it's very good. It's perfect. And there was evening and morning, and there's the sixth day. Now, we're over time. You can read that next little piece there, and that's the seventh day where God's going to rest. And if you'll notice it, and I'll talk more about this next week, God blesses. So he's blessed the animals, and he's blessed humans, and he's going to bless the Sabbath day. That's interesting. We'll talk about that more. Questions, comments, anybody want to throw up in here? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, we will see you next week, and we'll start getting into some good stuff. I'll see you.